Imagine you are standing outside on a perfectly normal Tuesday. The sky is blue. Birds are doing their bird thing. You are probably thinking about lunch, or whatever ancient humans thought about, which was probably also lunch. And then, with absolutely no warning, the sun starts disappearing. Not setting, not going behind a cloud. Just slowly, terrifyingly going dark in the middle of the day like the universe decided to shut off the lights without telling anybody. No one sent a text. No one posted about it. There was no NASA website to check. There was no scientist with a reassuring PowerPoint explaining orbital mechanics. There was just you, your group, and the dawning realization that the single most important thing in the sky, the thing that makes crops grow and animals move and humans not freeze to death, was being eaten by something you could not see. Now here is the really important question. What do you do? If you are a modern human, you put on some special glasses and take pictures for Instagram. If you are an ancient human with no context, no explanation, and no guarantee this has ever happened before or will ever stop, you do what any reasonable person would do in that situation. You completely lose your mind, and the historical record confirms this. Almost without exception. Across every culture that ever existed on this planet, a solar eclipse was treated as one of the most catastrophic, universe-altering, this might be the end events a human being could witness. But what they actually did about it is where things get genuinely fascinating, and in some cases, genuinely unhinged. Let us start with the Vikings, because the Vikings always make things better. Norse mythology held that the sun, which they called Sol, was being chased across the sky every single day by a giant wolf named Skoll. Not metaphorically. Literally. There was a wolf. It was enormous. It was fast, and its entire purpose in the cosmos was to eventually catch the sun and eat it. The eclipse, in their understanding, was not an astronomical event. It was the wolf catching up. Skoll had finally gotten close enough to take a bite. So what did the Vikings do when the sky started going dark? They screamed. They banged on things. They made as much noise as humanly possible. Drums, pots, yelling, whatever they had. The goal was to scare the wolf. To be so loud and so obnoxious that the wolf would drop the sun and run. And then the eclipse ended, which in the Viking framework meant it worked. The wolf dropped the sun. The noise saved the world. Which meant the next time an eclipse happened, they did it again. Louder. This is perhaps the earliest documented example of humans solving a problem they did not understand, with a solution that should not have worked, and then refusing to update their model because the outcome was technically correct. The ancient Chinese had their own version. They believed the sun was being swallowed by a dragon, a celestial dragon, the kind that shows up in Chinese mythology with alarming regularity and an appetite for astronomical objects. The response was essentially identical to the Viking approach. Drums, gongs, shouting, banging pots. The collective goal of the entire population was to be annoying enough that the dragon would spit the sun back out. And it worked every single time. Which tells you everything you need to know about how confidence and evidence are not always the same thing. What is remarkable here is not that these cultures got the explanation wrong. That is completely understandable given that they did not have telescopes, orbital calculators, or access to any of the centuries of astronomy that came later. What is remarkable is that independently, on opposite sides of the planet, two completely separate civilizations arrived at the exact same solution to an identical problem they had never compared notes on. Make noise, lots of it. Scare the thing eating the sun. This is either a profound coincidence or a very consistent window into how the human brain responds to things it cannot explain. When in doubt, yell at it. The ancient Egyptians took a different approach. Egypt was a civilization built around the concept that cosmic order, which they called Ma'at, was the fundamental operating system of the universe. The sun was not just a star to ancient Egyptians. The sun was Ra, the most powerful deity in the entire pantheon, the engine of existence, the thing that made everything else possible. An eclipse was not just darkness. It was a disruption of Ma'at itself. The cosmic order had been violated. The universe was, in their framework, in genuine danger of unraveling. So Egyptian priests did not bang pots. They performed elaborate ritual ceremonies. They chanted. They made offerings. They conducted the spiritual equivalent of emergency maintenance on the operating system of the universe. And given that the sun always came back, they had a pretty compelling track record. The ancient Mesopotamians, living in what is now Iraq, were arguably the most sophisticated astronomical observers in the ancient world. Babylonian astronomers had been tracking celestial events for centuries, and by around 700 BC, They had gotten good enough at it to actually predict eclipses before they happened. Not perfectly, and not with the precision of modern astronomy, but well enough that the Babylonian king would receive a warning that an eclipse was coming. This sounds like progress, and in many ways it was. But the response to that warning is where things take a turn, because in Babylonian culture, an eclipse was not just a bad sign. It was specifically a bad sign for the king. A solar eclipse was understood as a direct omen of the king's death. The universe was announcing, in the clearest possible terms, that the current ruler was about to be removed. So what did Babylonian kings do when they heard an eclipse was coming? They temporarily abdicated. They put a substitute king on the throne, a stand-in, usually some poor unfortunate peasant who was given the royal robes and told to sit there and look regal, while the actual king went into hiding under a fake name and waited for the eclipse to pass. The idea was that if death was coming for the king, it would find the substitute instead and be satisfied. This is genuinely one of the most creative solutions in the history of avoiding death, and it is also deeply unfair to the substitute, who presumably had not signed up for this when he woke up that morning. The Inca of South America believed that a solar eclipse meant the sun god Inti was angry. And when Inti was angry, you did not want to be a llama anywhere in the general vicinity, because the Inca response to divine anger was sacrifice. Not human sacrifice in most cases, but elaborate offerings, fasting, prayers, and rituals designed to placate a deity who was clearly having a bad day on a cosmic scale. The entire empire would stop. Work ceased, food was restricted. The population entered a collective period of mourning and prayer that lasted until the sun returned, and Inti's mood was apparently improved. In India, the ancient Hindu tradition held that eclipses were caused by the demon Rahu, who had once stolen a drink of the divine nectar of immortality. The gods Vishnu and the sun discovered the theft and cut off Rahu's head before he could swallow the nectar. But because he had already tasted immortality, his head became immortal separately from his body. And occasionally, out of revenge, the immortal head of Rahu would swallow the sun would eventually escape through Rahu's severed neck, which is why the eclipse always ends. This is, objectively, a much more dramatic explanation than orbital mechanics, and you have to respect the commitment to narrative. The response in many parts of ancient India was to immerse yourself in sacred water, specifically rivers like the Ganges, which were believed to have purifying powers strong enough to counteract the malevolent influence of Rahu. Entire populations would move to riverbanks during an eclipse, praying and bathing until the sun returned. But perhaps the most interesting response to eclipses in the ancient world was not fear at all. It was power, because if you knew an eclipse was coming, and nobody else did, you had an almost supernatural advantage over everyone around you. The explorer Christopher Columbus, stranded in Jamaica in 1504 with a hostile local population that had stopped supplying his crew with food, used a predicted lunar eclipse to bluff the entire island into submission. He announced to the local leaders that God was displeased with their behavior and would darken the moon as a sign of divine anger. The eclipse happened on schedule. The population panicked. Columbus immediately announced that he had negotiated with God on their behalf and convinced him to restore the moon, in exchange for the resumption of food supplies. It worked completely. The food came back. Columbus's crew survived. This is technically fraud, but it is also one of the most audacious uses of astronomical knowledge in recorded history. Thousands of years earlier, ancient priests and astronomers across multiple civilizations had figured out the same basic principle. If you can predict something that terrifies everyone else, you are not just smart. You are the person standing between the population and the void. You have power that no army can replicate, because armies can only threaten bodies. The person who controls the explanation of cosmic events threatens something much deeper. The feeling that the universe makes sense, and that someone is managing it on your behalf. This is why astronomical knowledge was almost universally held by priests in ancient civilizations. Not because priests happened to be interested in astronomy, but because the ability to predict and explain celestial events was one of the most concentrated sources of social power a human being could access, and the people who already held social power made sure to keep it. What ties all of these responses together, the screaming, the rituals, the substitute kings, the riverbank baths, the creative deception, is something that neuroscience has confirmed as one of the most fundamental features of the human brain. We are pattern recognition machines that experience genuine distress when patterns break. A solar eclipse is the single most violent possible break in the most consistent pattern in human experience. The sun rises. Every day, without exception, for every day of every life anyone has ever lived. And then one day it does not, in the middle of the day, with no warning. Researcher Ari Kruglansky at the University of Maryland has studied what psychologists call the need for cognitive closure, the deep discomfort humans experience in the absence of a clear explanation for events. What his research shows is that uncertainty is not just uncomfortable. For many people, it is genuinely threatening at a neurological level, triggering anxiety responses similar to physical danger. An ancient human watching the sky go dark in the middle of the day was not being irrational. They were having the correct reaction to an event that, from their informational position, genuinely could have been the end of everything. The next time you are standing outside watching an eclipse with your special glasses, knowing exactly what is happening, knowing exactly when it will end, knowing that the sun will be back and everything will be fine, take a moment to consider what it would feel like to be watching the exact same thing with none of that. No explanation, no timeline, no guarantee, just the sky going dark. And the question hanging in the air that every human before you faced without an answer: is the sun coming back? And if it is not, what do we do now? The answer, apparently, is to bang on every pot you own and yell at a wolf. And honestly, given the circumstances, that is not the worst plan anyone has ever had.